It was so hard growing up in my family household. I was basically the one to look after all my siblings. My father, he worked, but let's be real. He didn't work as hard as he could, so what did I decide to do? I thought that this was just enough. And I move out of my family home, and I promised them that I am going to make us rich. Well, long story kinda short, that happened. But when I come back, after a few years of being away, you will not believe what my family's been up to.
I'm 28 and male, and have always thought that you live your life for your loved ones, but I have a different opinion now. You can live your life for yourself and no one else. I had always worked so hard in my life that I could provide for my parents and 4 siblings. I had to sacrifice my dreams and compromise with everything to keep going with whatever I was doing for my family. I never cared about how ill I was, how strenuous the work had become, or how difficult it was for me, and I knew one thing. If I worked hard today, I'd be able to feed my family. I'd be able to put food on the table today, and if I work today but cannot work tomorrow, I won't be able to put food on the table. I won't be able to send my siblings to school, and I won't be able to buy any medicine when one of my family members fall ill. Living was becoming a harrowing and heart-wrenching ordeal, but how could I even contemplate giving up? The weight of responsibility rested solely on my shoulders, and after knowing that it was only I who could support my family and could stand behind them, after knowing that by sweating my blood and breaking my bones, I could make their stomach full. Every ounce of effort was poured into ensuring that they had enough to eat, but, you see, how can a single human support such a vast family alone? Still, I never complained about anything. I bore it all in silence, and never did I utter a complaint or seek solace from them. I never asked them to work, but now I feel that was my mistake. I had gotten so frustrated by living my life that I had to leave everything. Otherwise, I could have died a miserable poor death. After all these years, when I come back to see my family, they say they don't want to see my face now. They ask me to return to the same place I had come from, and I don't know how to approach them in this situation, but before anything, let me take you back a little in time. Ever since I opened my eyes, I have seen poverty. I lived 24 years of my life in poverty, and my father, Marley, toiled as a janitor in a local restaurant, but the meager pay they offered him left us struggling to make ends meet. My dad was unable to find a decent job throughout his life. He was 24 when he went ahead to marry my mama, while she was only 19. It does not make sense to me, but my father and mother had an impoverished background, and they were neighbors too, and both started working when they were only high schoolers, so they could support their families, yet for how long could they continue to do it alone? They ran away from their families and decided to marry to survive together. Mama, well, she found a job, and Dad did too, and they rented a trailer home, which they bought after I turned 14 years of age. They took out a loan that I was to pay for several years until it was completely paid off. My dad would tire after a day's work, as he worked 7 days a week. Sometimes he would take off on Sundays, but otherwise he found something to do even that day. He turned to whiskey to cope with the pressure and frustrations of life, seeking temporary relief. He drank alcohol several times a week, but it grew to be every night throughout the week. My dad was not the aggressive type, but with time and a mental breakdown, he became really toxic. He raised his hand on my mom just a few times without even apologizing once. By the time I turned 15, I already had 4 siblings. My dad's struggle with alcohol addiction caused him to become idle on weekends, making it even harder for him to provide for our family of 7. The weight of responsibility fell heavily on my young shoulders, and I had no choice but to step up and start working. I would do this or that, earn a little here and there, but once I turned 16 years of age, I started working as a server at a small cafe. They paid a decent wage, and I sought opportunities at 2 more places, juggling multiple jobs throughout the week. I knew it was against the law for a teenager to work so much, but desperate times calls for desperate measures. I could not go to school after that, yet I worked hard so at least my siblings could go to school and get educated. My mama also tried her best to support me, and she helped me morally and emotionally because as a teenager she feared that I might run away or do something much worse than that. In hindsight, I feel like she could see ahead in the future because I did run away from my house, but I will talk about that a little later. When I turned 18, I worked as a part of the cleaning crew in a big restaurant in our town. Since I only had to work during morning hours, I sought more opportunities. I started working as a waiter at a different restaurant in the afternoon, and I also worked as a fast food delivery boy for the rest of the day. You can already picture how tirelessly I worked and how arduous it must have been for a single mother, being to do everything 6 days a week. I took off on Sundays because I started taking computer lessons from a friend I met at work. He told me that if I knew how to use the computer, I could quickly get opportunities at good places with higher pay. I thought it would be an amazing opportunity to get a single job, work 6 days a week and get a decent wage to support your whole family. And that scenario, I would not have to toil and juggle multiple jobs like I was doing. With time, I did not realize that working 7 days a week and not taking even a day off to just rest at home would take a toll on my health. It would affect my productivity. It did happen, and I was to face the consequences of that, and I turned 20. My working hours would increase wherever I worked. I was unable to cope with everything alone. My dad's behavior had become more abusive, not only towards my mom, but us children as well. One day, my dad came home late at night, completely drunk, and announced that he would no longer work. He said, now his kids are old enough to start earning the money around here, and this statement took us all aback a bit. Mama tried to put some sense into him, mentioning that my siblings were still kids, and I was mad because all my life I worked hard to send my siblings to school. And my dad wanted them to just start working. Yeah, he was drunk, so I simply tried to talk to him, asking how Joseph could begin working when he was already striving to get a scholarship, just to get admission to a university. I mean, Alicia was already in high school and could barely study properly after the commotion my dad created every night. Matthew and Brianna were still kids, so how could they start working? I understood that living in a trailer was demanding enough for us, but we were all trying our best to make do with whatever and however. My father did not listen to me and smashed me in the face. Mom came running and became my shield to stop Dad's next punch, but he had already realized his actions were wrong, and he ran outside the trailer and sat on the stairs, and it made me so upset. After working all my life to lessen his burden, in the end he offered me nothing more than a punch. I could not help but see the faces of my siblings and Mama, and swallow my anger like a bitter pill. I think the time was indeed not right, because the next day I got fired from 2 of the jobs. I had started working as a mechanic, but the task was new, so I made a mistake while mending someone's car. I had hardly finished begging my boss to let me stay when he fired me. I was so out of my mind that day, I made another mistake at a different place where I worked as a server. I was carrying someone's order in my hand, and I noticed a woman dressed in black who looked, ethereal, like a goddess. She held a cat in her arms, and the cat leaped towards me in a blink of an eye. Startled, I lost my grip on the order, and it fell on the ground, and it caused an expensive plate to shatter. My boss gave me a stern talking to and fired me. I was very disheartened and hopeless that I wanted to run away, and I went home and Mom told me that Dad had found a job. I could not tell her I got fired from 2 places that night. That night, when everyone was sleeping, I retrospected if this was the way I was going to continue to live to support my family. Then I might never be able to breathe calmly for a single day. I packed my bags and left the trailer. I even wrote a note that I would return once I became rich. Finally, I have become rich after toiling for the first 4 years and working diligently for the next 4. I also kept my promise, as after 8 long years, I decided to return to my family and get them out of their misery. But when I went home, I saw that another family was living in the trailer. They told me that the family that lived in the trailer before had moved to a room in a nearby area. I went there and found my dad in an utterly ill condition when he came to open the door. He immediately recognized me, and Mom wasn't home. None of my siblings were home, and my dad was so sick. But he still had the energy to come at me with this furious look and speak angry that I was no longer his son and did not want to look at my face again, and he shut the door. I don't know what to do now. I guess my mom and siblings must have gone to work. I want to tell them I have enough money to support them, and if any of you have any suggestions, please tell me how I should approach my furious father and make him and everyone understand that I've returned for their good. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. Alright, so today's story is a family drama for sure, but it looks like we're about 8 years fast-forwarded. And guys, I have 4 updates, and things are about to get a little wild. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button. It's the best way to support me, and I appreciate that. Guys, let's just jump right into update number 1. I can see how so many of you have sided with my father, with what he did when he kicked me out of the house. At least I'm glad to see that some people have genuinely sided with me, though. Well, many of you have suggested I be stubborn and mending my relationship with my family. I took your suggestions and went home yesterday to see my parents and siblings again. This time, I had hoped to see my mom and brothers and sisters. I reached home in the evening, thinking everyone would be home too, and I knocked on the door. Brianna opened it, and even after not seeing her for the past 8 years, I immediately recognized her. She's grown up into a beautiful girl with curly brown hair. She saw and jumped with happiness, and I could see her smiling brightly, but realizing something, she stopped smiling. She invited me in, and there was Joseph, all grown up into an adult. There was Alicia, with her green eyes shining brightly as she saw me, and there was my brother Matthew, and of course Brianna. They were watching something together in the living room, and they all jumped out of their feet and hugged me. And Joseph asked where I was for all these years, and sitting down on the couch I inquired what they have been doing. How have they been all this time, and where did Dad and Mom have been? Alicia told me that Mom had taken Dad for his weekly checkup as he had been showing severe symptoms of asthma. Joseph further said to me that he had been working as a mechanic as soon as I left. He had to discontinue his studies. Dad could not support the family alone, so Joseph did all his share to the burden. Hearing this absolutely broke my heart. If there was anything I wanted was for my siblings to get proper education. But Joseph could not get it because of me, and Alicia was in university because she got a good scholarship and worked part-time, but both Matthew and Brianna were studying in high school and working part-time just to support their expenses. They had saved enough to rent a proper house, and Dad also gave the trailer for rent. Joseph told me that after I left, everybody was absolutely heartbroken, but Dad was the most affected. He had become hopeless until Mom consoled him. They lived more bad days than good, and Brianna told me how it was hard even to continue the schooling. But then Joseph decided to leave school instead of everyone leaving school and working multiple jobs as I did. Joseph said that as long as they all worked and did whatever was possible for them to do, they were able to survive all the hardships together. As I kept thinking how cruel time could be, sparing some nothing but hardships, Alicia asked where I had been all this time, and no sooner did I start to tell them that my dad and Mom returned. Dad saw me and his face turned red with rage, and Mom was not expecting me. Seeing me, she started to cry, and Dad walked towards me, grabbed me by my hand, and dragged me out of the house. All of my siblings were simply just trying to stop him from doing this, and Mom too wanted him to not throw me out, but Dad did what he deemed was right. He shut the door again, and I knocked many times, shouting that I had something to say, but all I could hear was Dad shouting at my siblings and then coughing. I waited to see if anyone could open the door for me and ask me where I've been for 8 long years, but nobody came to that door. Not even my mom. I have decided that I will go home today as well. I'll make sure that I tell them this time how wealthy I've become. How wrong they are to throw me out just like that, and I'll tell my dad that I've gone so I could come back wealthier. If they had a hard time, I also had it too. I don't know how to make them listen to me, seeing I've been kicked out twice already. Update number 2. Taking all the right suggestions to convince my family from you all, I went once again to see them. Mom opened the door and I could see she was happy to see me, but also worried since she must have been thinking about how Dad would react this time. She first announced that I had arrived, then she invited me in. I was wondering what I would do if Dad comes raging again at me and threw me out, but he did not. He was sitting in his room and refused to come out. He even shouted that once my mom and Alicia, us, they were the only people home that day, were done talking to me, they sent me home. I wondered what Mom must have talked to Dad about, otherwise, why would he sit without attempting to kick me out again? Alicia inquired after the past 8 years. I told him that I had packed my bag, got on a random train, and reached the city without any plans. Initially, I survived by just staying at the garage and working as a mechanic. Eventually, I heard about chauffeur opportunities and joined an agency where I underwent training and secured a chauffeur job. After working tirelessly as a driver for 5 days a week and a server for 2 other days, I was able to sustain myself for the next few years, and later I started working as a chauffeur for a businessman who had a mammoth business. It was a bunch of restaurants running all across the city. He was an old friendly man, and he once asked me various questions about going to restaurants as a customer, and I told him that I never went as a customer but as a waiter. One day I dropped him at one of his restaurants where a quarrel broke out, and I was the one to resolve it, and seeing my skills and becoming aware that I had basic knowledge of computers, my boss offered me a junior managing position at that exact same restaurant. I worked there until I got promoted last year to the position of assistant manager. My boss has been really impressed by my skills and has promised to make me general manager because he says that I'm the most honest and skilled man he's ever met in his entire business career. I know it all sounds too good to be true, but you see, miracles happen, and if you can believe that I've juggled multiple jobs for several years, then you must believe that after 8 years, I can really become an assistant manager. Nevertheless, I told everything to my parents, saying I've become filthy rich in all senses. I've started investing in other businesses as well, and I've done everything all by myself. My mama looked at me, raising her voice, and she asked where I was when they needed me the most. Now, you tell me, what should I have told her here? I told them everything, and still they acted as if I left them for selfish reasons. She told me how hard life had become for them after I left, because Joseph had to take my place. They all had to start working because I left, and I felt really irked by this reaction coming from Mom, and I told her that they never cared how mentally frustrated I had become, and I never told them to work or share my burden, but how could they be so ungrateful after everything I have been doing for them? Even now, I come back only for them. My dad came out of his room and got his face close to me and blew up. He didn't care if I had left them because of mental frustration. He simply told me to leave, because he could not believe that I've come back for them now. He said they could rely on someone who runs away like a coward never. I could not take it any longer, and I told him that I was leaving, and I left the house while Alicia kept asking me to not take Dad's word to my heart. But how could I not? Update number 3. You see, until people really see with their own eyes, they don't believe what seems unreal to them. The last time I updated you, many of you commented that I should not have stormed out like that. Let me remind you that I also have a limit, so I simply want to thank those who understand how I must have felt. It was humiliating to be doubted by my family, yet things turned out differently this week. There was an article published with my picture on the front page this week, and I had invested in opening a new restaurant by the reach of the city beach. I had expected to do well since summer and beach sit graciously together in people's plans every single year, but I did not expect that it would do better than just well. This summer, my restaurant produced a revenue of $100,000. I had that article published to advertise my restaurant alongside the fact that I've earned dollars in the thousands this summer alone. My family must have come across that article since Joseph reached out to me this week. He sent me a direct message on Facebook since they didn't have my number, and I met him at a cafe, where he told me how much dire assistance the situation was. All of his earnings were getting divided into crumbs, since he was to pay for rent, for Dad's treatment, and for groceries. Mom's earnings took care of the other small necessities, and Dad was not working as I already told you about his condition. Joseph asked me to return as they needed me. He told me how much everyone had missed me, and I told him I would only return once Father acknowledged my worth. Once he admitted that in my time I had also shared this burden and that I am not a, quote, coward. Update number 4. This will be my last update, guys. I simply want to say that I do agree with those comments that simply call me out for stupid conditions I've put in front of Joseph during our meeting. My poor brother still said that he would talk to Dad, though. I met with Joseph and asked him to talk to Dad in front of me on a phone call, and he did. And he let me tell you what, I'm utterly disappointed in my family. He said that he came across the advertisements in the paper and he feels so proud to raise a rich son. It made me furious that they want to accept me only because of my wealth now, or else they were just fine kicking me out when they had not believed me. You see, I realize the things have not really been resolved yet with my family completely since my dad and I am surprised to say, though, that my mom, too, has not made amends with me. They think that I left them adrift, and Joseph has joined my business venture. I did not want to, wait to become a general manager at my my ex-boss's restaurant. I left to expand my own business. I'm skeptical of whether I should make amends with my parents or not, since they have come around after knowing I am truly rich. I asked Matthew and Brianna to continue their part-time jobs so they could gain experience, and Alicia to keep studying hard at university, and I would cover her expenses. I made Joseph apply for MBA, alongside working for me until he started his own business or decided what he wanted to do in life. You see, my family says I left them when they needed me most, and I guess I also did not have anyone for emotional support when I needed a family too. So here we are, really even, and although it's not a competition, if I did not have left with my family, I would not have been where I am today. A man with money in the bank and still pondering about the reunion.
Alright guys, so a lot of people were pretty mad in the comment section towards the end of this story when we found out that the parents only really wanted to reconcile with OP because OP is now rich. So, I want to know what you guys think about this story. Let's say, for instance, you were in OP's position. What would you have done when you find out your parents really only want to be with you now because you're rich? And also, you find out your father's battling this illness. He doesn't want anything to do with you at first. I mean, there was a lot going on with this story. So, drop your comments down below in the comment section. My name's Mr. Reddito. Thank you guys for joining me today. If you're new to the channel, I narrate stories every single day. I hope to see you guys tomorrow. Hit that subscribe button, and just remember, it's cool to be kind. I'll see you guys tomorrow.